In 1983, Gerber passed on it. AT&T passed on it. The United States Army passed on it. Every knife company Tim Leatherman approached said it was a tool, not a knife. Every tool company said it was a gadget, not a tool. For 8 years, not a single company in America with the resources to manufacture what he had built was willing to do it. He collected hundreds of rejection letters. Most of them said no in a single paragraph. One company could not even spell his partner's name correctly on the piece of paper that turned him away. Today, 128 million of those tools have been sold in more than 80 countries. The Museum of Modern Art in New York put one in their permanent collection. NASA flies them to the International Space Station. United States soldiers carry them into combat. And if you have ever worked with your hands, in a garage, on a job site, out in the field, somewhere when something broke, and you needed to fix it right then, there is a reasonable chance one is sitting in your pocket right now. The most rejected invention in American tool history became the most copied multi-tool on Earth. This is not a quick story. It is a story about a borrowed garage, and a stack of unanswered letters, and a wife who believed in something her husband could not stop building, even when the rest of the world had already decided it was not worth their time. If that kind of story is what brought you here, this channel was built for exactly that. Subscribe before we continue. To understand where the tool came from, you have to go back to the summer of 1975. Not to a factory, not to a laboratory, to a road somewhere in the Middle East, beside a broken-down car, with a young engineer crouching in the dust wondering what he was going to do next. Tim Leatherman was 26 years old, newly married, running low on money. He had graduated from Oregon State University 5 years earlier with a degree in mechanical engineering, and he had met his wife Shao, a Vietnamese woman, in the basement of a Portland State dormitory over a game of ping pong. They had married in Saigon in 1972, months before that city's world came apart around them. Now they were newlyweds trying to see 17 countries on a budget so tight that their entire transportation plan consisted of a single used car purchased in the Netherlands for $300. The car was a 1968 Fiat 600. It was cheap for a reason. Over the next 10 months, traveling through France, Italy, and deep into the Middle East, that Fiat broke down more times than Tim could reliably count. Every time it stopped, every time a hose cracked, a fitting came loose, something rattled free somewhere inside the engine. Tim crouched beside the car with what he had in his pocket. A Boy Scout-style folding knife. It cut bread. It pried open things that were not meant to be pried open. It was better than nothing. But what Tim kept wishing for, on every dusty roadside with the engine cooling in the heat, was a pair of pliers. Just a pair of pliers, small enough to carry in a pocket, and strong enough to actually fix something when the moment required it. He pulled a piece of paper from his shirt pocket and started sketching. The rough outline of what would become the Leatherman multi-tool took shape for the first time on that road, drawn by a man standing next to a broken car, because he had nothing better to do while he waited. He did not know yet what those sketches were going to cost him. When Tim and Shao came home to Portland, they made a quiet arrangement between them. She would work. She spent those years supporting Vietnamese refugees through resettlement programs, keeping food on the table, keeping the household running, keeping the life around Tim stable, enough that he could stay in the garage and keep building. Tim told her the prototype would take about a month. It took 3 years. He worked in his brother-in-law's borrowed garage. He salvaged metal from discarded appliances. He taught himself, piece by piece, the tolerances the design demanded, the hinge tension, the blade retention, the bite angle of the pliers, the precise geometry a file surface needs to actually remove material rather than simply drag across it. He built the entire tool around one central idea, folding pliers at the center. Everything else, the knife, the file, the screwdrivers, the can opener, the wire cutters, living inside the handles that the pliers folded back into. 13 functions, stainless steel throughout. He filed for the patent on July 13, 1978. It was granted on December 16, 1980. United States Patent Number Formula 238-862. Pocket Multiple Tool. By 1980, Tim had something real. A working prototype. A legal patent. Name for what he had built, he called the early concept Mr. Crunch. The name would not survive. The object would. Now he needed someone to manufacture it. What happened next lasted 3.5 years, and it very nearly ended everything. Tim Leatherman wrote letters. He made phone calls. He showed up at trade shows. He brought his prototype to knife companies and tool companies and corporate purchasing departments and government agencies across the country. He went to AT&T, arguing that telephone technicians carried tools on their belt every single day and needed exactly this kind of thing within reach. AT&T was not interested. He went to the United States Army. The Army was not interested. He walked into Gerber, one of the most respected knife companies in America, headquartered in Portland, within driving distance of the very garage where he had spent 3 years building the tool, and laid it on the table in front of them. Gerber passed. The knife companies said it was a tool, not a knife. The tool companies said it was a gadget, not a tool. One rejection letter came back with Steve Berliner's name spelled wrong. The company could not be bothered to get the name right on the piece of paper that said no. Stand in that place for a moment if you can. You have spent 3 years in a borrowed garage, building something from scrap metal and second-hand machinery. You have a patent. You have a working tool in your hand that you believe in completely, that you have tested, refined, rebuilt, and tested again until every tolerance is exactly what it needs to be. And for 3.5 years, every company you bring it to picks it up, handles it, sets it back down on the table, and tells you the same thing. No market, no category, no interest. Not because the tool is bad, because the market does not yet exist, because there is no shelf at any retailer in America where a folding plier-based pocket tool belongs, because the buyers Tim needed to say yes had spent their entire careers selling things that fit known categories, and this did not fit any of them. When something has never existed before, it is nearly impossible to sell this idea of making it. The demand was real. It was everywhere. It just did not show up in any report, on any spreadsheet, in any purchasing department analysis, because it had never been satisfied before. This is where most people stop. This is where the idea ends, and the inventor walks back into a normal life and tells the story at dinner parties for the rest of their years about the thing they almost built. Tim Leatherman did not stop. Chow did not tell him to. Combination, a man who could not quit, and a woman who never asked him to, is the reason 128 million of these tools exist today. There is a moment in most long struggles where something shifts. Not the final breakthrough, just the thing that makes the breakthrough possible. For Tim Leatherman, that moment arrived in roughly his 7th year in the form of an old college friend named Steve Berliner. Berliner had known Tim since Oregon State. His father owned a metalworking business in Portland called Simplicity Tool Company. Berliner was practical where Tim was relentless. He looked at the prototype, and he saw something worth betting on. But he also saw the problem that Tim had been walking past for 3.5 years without fully recognizing it. The wholesale price was too high. Tim had been approaching buyers at $40 per unit. Berliner told him to cut it in half, drop it to 20, simplify the pitch entirely, and stop approaching knife companies and tool companies. Start approaching outdoor catalogs, the people who sold to hunters, to campers, to tradespeople who wanted to be prepared without hauling a full toolbox into the field. Tim listened. On July 5, 1983, Leatherman Tool Group Incorporated was born in Portland, Oregon. Berliner would help manage the business side. Simplicity Tool Company would handle early production on a subcontract basis. Tim would build the tool and put his name on every single one. That last part was not a marketing decision. It was personal. Tim said it as plainly as anything he ever said publicly. It has to be perfect. My name is on every tool. At the 1983 SHOT Show, the annual outdoor and sporting goods trade gathering, Tim stood at a small booth and put his tool into the hands of every buyer who walked past. Cabela's, the Nebraska Outdoor Catalog Company, placed the first order. 500 units with 7 months to deliver. Early Winters, a Seattle gear catalog, placed a concurrent order for their holiday issue. The first pocket survival tools shipped just before Christmas 1983. In the first week of January 1984, Early Winters doubled their order. A week later, they ordered again, then 1,000 more. 2 weeks after that, Tim's goal for all of 1984 had been 4,000 tools. By the end of that year, Leatherman had shipped nearly 30,000 units in the first year of its existence for a product that every company in America had already decided had no market. By 1993, Leatherman was selling more than 1 million tools per year. Revenue had crossed $30 million. The catalog market Berliner had identified had opened into hardware stores, then sporting goods retailers, then military exchanges, then every major outdoor retailer in the country. In 1994 came the Super Tool, the first Leatherman with fully locking blades, 650,000 units in its second year alone. In 1998, an engineer at Leatherman named Ben Rivera, who had joined the company 5 years earlier straight out of school, spent 2 years redesigning the flagship from the ground up. The result was the Wave, introduced at the 1998 SHOT Show. It was the first Leatherman with blades accessible from the outside. Opening one-handed, without unfolding the pliers, it became the best-selling multi-tool in history. In 2001, cumulative sales crossed 20 million. Revenue crossed $100 million. In 2004, the Museum of Modern Art in New York inducted the Wave into their permanent design collection. A folding plier-based tool from a factory in Portland, Oregon, placed alongside the defining design objects of the 20th century. It would be easy to look back at all of those rejection letters and call the companies that sent them foolish. They were not foolish. They were making rational decisions with the information they had available. When a purchasing manager picked up Tim's prototype in 1980 and set it back down on the table, he was not evaluating whether the tool was good. He was evaluating whether he could sell it. And to answer that question, he looked at what customers had bought before, at what shelf space existed, at what category the tool would be listed under in the catalog. None of that pointed toward yes, because no comparable product had ever been sold. Nobody had filled out a survey saying they wished they had a pair of pliers in their pocket. The demand did not show up in any report because the product did not yet exist. What the spreadsheets could not measure was the gap between what people said they needed and what they actually reached. For the moment something broke, every person who had ever tried to fix a car on the side of a road with a tool that was not quite right for the job, every technician who had ever wished for something different than what was in their hand, every soldier, every farmer, every contractor standing in a situation where having the right thing would have made all the difference. That demand was real, and it was everywhere. It was just invisible to anyone looking at a sales report, because it had never been satisfied before. The companies that passed on Tim's prototype did not pass on a bad idea. They passed on the best-selling multi-tool in human history because they were not built to see what was not yet there. Tim Leatherman's was built exactly that way. If you are old enough to remember when a tool with an American name meant something specific, when the warranty inside the box was a promise rather than a paragraph of exclusions, then you already know what happened to most of the brands your father trusted. The story was the same across dozens of American manufacturers. The cost differential between a factory in Ohio and a factory in southern China grew too large to absorb and still compete on retail price. The math stopped working, and one by one, the names stayed while the factories quietly moved. The tools got lighter, not in a good way. The boxes said the same things they always had. The objects inside were not quite the same objects they used to be. That calculation was not irrational. The numbers genuinely did not work. Leatherman ran the same math and reached the same conclusions that every other American manufacturer reached, and then stayed in Portland anyway. Tim Leatherman was asked more than once whether the company had ever seriously considered moving production overseas. His answer was the same every time: no, never any consideration. We are proud of the jobs we have created here in Portland. That is not a tagline. That is 40 years of payroll decisions, renewed every quarter, every time a consultant ran the numbers, and the numbers came back pointing in the same direction they always pointed. That is more than 500 people who showed up to a factory 2 miles east of Portland International Airport because Leatherman Tool Group made a decision once that they were staying and then never revisited it. The 25-year warranty printed inside every Leatherman tool is the consequence of that decision. You cannot promise to repair something for 25 years if you are not certain you will still be there in 25 years. You cannot honor a lifetime commitment from a building you no longer own in a city where you no longer operate. Leatherman stayed. The warranty means something because the people are still there. The factory sits at 1216 Northeast Ainsworth Circle in Portland, Oregon. On Wednesday mornings, Tim Leatherman gives free tours to anyone who walks through the door. There is no charge. You just walk in. 800-pound coils of American steel, sourced from mills in Ohio, feed into 300-ton hydraulic presses. The sound is not background noise. It lands in your chest before it reaches your ears. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The rhythm of something being made carefully, at the pace that careful making demands. Components move from the presses to grinding stations, where file teeth are cut into steel at tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Blades travel to a heat-treating partner 12 miles south in Milwaukee, Oregon, hardened and tempered, then returned for final finishing. The smell of cutting fluid and fine steel dust settles into everything by midday, into the air, into your clothes, into your hands if you stay long enough. And then the tools are assembled by hand. Leatherman tested automation on the assembly floor. They ran the trials, analyzed the results, completed the full engineering analysis. The robots could not do it. The precise hinge tension that makes a Leatherman feel right when you open it. Tight enough to hold position, smooth enough to work one-handed, has to be set by a person who has tensioned 10,000 hinges and knows, before the tool fully closes, whether it is right or whether it needs one more half turn. You cannot optimize that away and still have the same tool on the other side of the process. More than 500 people work in Portland today. In January 2026, Ben Rivera, the engineer who designed the Micra and the Wave and who spent 34 years at the same company, handed the chief executive role to Chris Hamper and moved into an advisory position focused on product development. Rivera said publicly that he believes the best Leatherman product has not been built yet. In July 2025, Leatherman launched its first dedicated knife line. 5 precision fixed blades built from premium steel at a new Portland facility constructed specifically for the purpose. In October 2025, the Wave Alpha arrived, a premium redesign of the most important multi-tool ever made. And in November 2025, Leatherman launched a peer-to-peer resale marketplace called Leatherman Exchange, where the full 25-year warranty transfers to the second owner. Not a modified version, the same warranty. The tool follows the tool, not the original buyer. That last detail is worth sitting with for a moment. It is a company saying their product will outlive the person who buys it the first time, and backing that claim with a warranty policy built on 4 decades of the same people, in the same building, making the same tool the same way. Close your eyes. Stand outside 1216 Northeast Ainsworth Circle in Portland, Oregon. Hear the 300-ton presses cycling. Feel the low vibration moving up through the concrete and into your feet. Think about Chow Leatherman working across town while Tim measured hinge tolerances in a borrowed garage with scrap metal from someone else's discarded appliances. Think about the stack of rejection letters sitting on the workbench. Gerber, AT&T, the United States Army. The company that could not spell the name right on the piece of paper that said no. 8 years of that. 8 years of the same answer from every company that had the resources to say yes. Now open your eyes. More than 500 people are at work inside that building today. The presses are still running. The steel is American. The tool is still assembled by hand by people who know what right feels like because they have done it 10,000 times. Each tool carries a date code stamped inside the handle. So the warranty department knows exactly when it was made and can honor exactly what was promised when it was. The name on every single one of them is the same name it has carried since 1983, the name of a man who heard no from everyone who mattered for 8 years, and built 128 million yeses anyway. If you carry one of these, you already know what that name means.